Hello, everybody. Let's start with the first bad type of code that you have, or you have an if-else, if-else, if-else. If you know me from YouTube for a long time, you know that I sort of hate this type of code. And if this was me, I would have written this in a completely different way. In fact, I'm going to show you later in the video how we can actually rewrite this in a better way. But besides the point, do not use the ternary operator to compare strings. It's a very weird way to compare strings, and it's not really a safe way to compare strings. Use something appropriate for comparing strings like string comparisons based on the culture, the case normalization, like things that are built for comparing strings. Now, besides the point, you have an if-else, 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 which, you know, is a type of code I hate. And we're going to see how we can refactor this later in the video, but you have code that is fairly easily readable. Now, you could say, why don't you just set the environment to the development environment? That's because, as you can see over here, it is called pre-pro in the environment variable, but the user wants to use PRP and PRD here. So even the example is flawed because, what is the point of just having this shorthand? Why can't you just use the name on the environment in the parameter? But that's fine. We can look past that and we can see that we have a perfectly readable, fine, dodgy-looking code. But there's nothing fundamentally wrong with it, in my opinion. Actually, the ternary operator is the biggest problem with this piece of code. I wouldn't do string comparison this way in CodeCop. But what's the suggestion? You use the ternary operator, which means you go with environment is UAT. Okay, then use UAT. Otherwise, it's environment pre-pro. Okay, then use pre-pro. Oh, and then it's like, and you have to keep going. Now, if you don't understand what's wrong with this piece of code, I'll tell you. It's kind of long. Okay, that is not just the problem. The problem is that it's very, very, very hard to read. Imagine that you want to know what happens just by looking at this. You have to go check every previous condition before you go into the one you're interested in. So, ternary operators are fine if it's for something very short. And in fact, if it was just about environment is something, otherwise, it's something else, fine, use it. It is perfect. But when you have multiple chain ternary operators, that is, how do you justify this as a clean code tip? It is terrible. The only clean thing you could justify about this here is that it's one line of code that doesn't even mean anything. One line of code or fewer lines of code doesn't mean cleaner code. In fact, most times it means worse code because you're trying to smoosh way too much in a very small space. Like, at least you could new line on every else statement to make this look a bit better. Now, just to give a bit of more context with everything and start playing around with the code, I'm going to go into the ID, and I've written this example over here so we can play around with it. So we start with this, which, by the way, I wouldn't code it this way. There's this weird space that for some reason the creator added after every else if, which, if you're not going to use curly braces, then do that. Now, I'm assuming that they did this because it is, in my opinion, a bit harder to read this way. So you could just use the add braces refactoring, sort of try and make it read a bit better. But even then, if you want to refactor this piece of code to what they had, which is basically this, then as you can see, that is why it's such a pointless change that even Writer, my ID's refactorings, don't have it as a suggestion. Usually, you have these sort of shorthand suggestions, but the one you're getting here is, well, the two ones that only make sense. Use a switch statement. So now do something like this, which, again, I'm not a big fan of because I'm a bigger fan of the switch expression. And look how much better this is, how more expressive it is, how more direct it is, and way less bloated. Now all you have is say, config development environment equal environment. Switch on the environment and then basically build a bit of a map here to say if it's this, then this, then this, and if it's a default, fall back into an empty string. In what universe would this be worse than this? I don't even know what's happening here. Why is it even there? And in fact, my ID writer recommends a refactoring to the switch expression from the ternary operator because it is better, it looks better. Why would you shoot yourself in the foot by having these chain ternary operators? Don't do this, never do this. Now, this isn't the only way you can write this. You can sort of have the same type of logic as well, but with a map. By map, I mean that you can have a dictionary which sort of maps out your environment. So you can say from UAT to UAT, from pre-pro to PRP, and from prod to PRD. And then to get the environment appropriate to the one that's incoming, you can do something like environment equals environment map, get value or default. If you find an environment, give it back. If you don't, string or empty, and then set that to the parameter. So both of these approaches, in my opinion, are way better. I would sort of wrap this into some sort of method. I wouldn't just expose it to everything, but I would just go ahead and use this in my code. Why would you use the ternary operator? It's just so weird. Now, as always, I want to know your thoughts. In the description down below, if you have an alternative or a different way you would do this, please leave a comment down below and let me know. And if you genuinely prefer the ternary operator approach, let me know as well. Why? Because I might be missing something. As always, if you find questionable clean code examples, please tag me or send them over, and I might make a video on them. Well, that's all I had for you for the video. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, keep coding.